It began on one of the coldest nights of the year. Officer Mark Jensen had just finished his patrol when he heard scratching at his cabin door. Snow was falling hard, wind howling through the trees. When he opened the door, standing there was Rex, his fur coated in frost, his body trembling, and in his mouth a tiny puppy, frozen stiff but still alive. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a fight for life, a moment of instinct, loyalty, and love that would melt even the coldest heart. Stay till the end, because what Rex did next will warm your heart forever. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind howled through the narrow streets, carrying with it sheets of blinding snow. It was the kind of night when even the city seemed to disappear beneath the storm. A world of white and silence broken only by the crackle of freezing air. Officer Mark Jensen guided his patrol car slowly through the deserted road, wipers fighting the relentless snow. His German Shepherd Rex sat alert in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the darkness as if every shadow mattered. The radio crackled with static. All units, visibility low. Return to base if not essential. Mark exhaled and turned toward the cabin he called home, a small wooden retreat at the forest's edge. He'd built it for peace, not for nights like this. As he parked, Rex gave a low whine, his ears twitching. Mark smiled faintly. "Yeah, buddy. I'm ready to get inside too." Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out, the cold biting through his uniform. The scent of pine and frost filled the air, sharp and pure. He opened the door, letting Rex bound inside, shaking off snowflakes that sparkled in the dim light. Inside, the crackle of the fireplace greeted them. Mark hung up his jacket and rubbed his gloved hands together. Outside, the storm roared on, rattling the windows. He poured himself a cup of coffee and glanced toward Rex, who now lay by the fire, eyes half closed but ears still alert. For a moment, peace filled the small cabin, the kind that only winter nights could bring. Mark didn't know it yet, but the quiet wouldn't last. Before the night was over, Rex would bring something to that door that would change both their lives forever. The storm outside had only grown fiercer. Snow pounded against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, and the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire, lost in its flickering warmth. Rex, though lying near the hearth, seemed restless. His ears perked at every gust of wind, every faint noise beyond the walls. Something outside was pulling his attention. Then came the sound. Scratch. Scratch. A faint, rhythmic noise at the front door. Mark frowned and glanced at Rex. The dog was already on his feet, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the door. Another scratch, longer this time, desperate. "Probably a branch," Mark muttered, setting his mug aside. But Rex's low growl said otherwise. Mark grabbed his flashlight and walked to the door. The moment his hand touched the handle, Rex barked sharply, one deep, urgent sound that cut through the storm. Mark's pulse quickened. He opened the door just a crack, and the freezing wind rushed in, carrying with it a swirl of snow. What he saw next made him freeze. There stood Rex, not inside by the fire, but outside in the blizzard, his fur coated in snow. Mark blinked in disbelief.
"Rex, how?"
But his question died on his lips when he saw what Rex held gently in his mouth. A tiny, motionless puppy, limp and covered in frost. Mark's breath caught. The little body hung lifeless, its fur stiff with ice. Rex's eyes met his, pleading, urgent, almost human. Without hesitation, Mark swung the door open wide. "Get in here!" he shouted over the wind. Rex stepped inside, careful not to drop the puppy. The warmth hit them instantly, but the sight before Mark sent a chill through his heart. Whatever had happened out there in the storm, this little life was hanging by a thread. Mark dropped to his knees, heart pounding as he gently took the tiny puppy from Rex's mouth. Its body was stiff, fragile as glass, and terrifyingly cold. Frost clung to its whiskers and its shallow chest barely moved. For a split second, Mark feared it was already gone. The small creature looked no older than a few weeks, its fur soaked and clumped from the snow. He could feel the faintest whisper of life, just enough to make him act fast. "Easy, boy," Mark murmured to Rex, who hovered close, eyes wide with concern. The dog whimpered softly as if begging him to help. Mark carried the puppy to the living room and laid it on a soft towel near the fireplace. The contrast of warmth against its frozen fur sent a pang through him. He could see its tiny paws twitch weakly, trying to move. Rex paced in circles, whining low, his gaze fixed on the trembling form. The fire crackled louder now, throwing golden light across the cabin walls. Mark grabbed a small blanket and wrapped the puppy, rubbing its body gently to restore circulation. "Hang in there, little one," he whispered. "You're safe now." He filled a bowl with warm, not hot water, dampened a cloth, and pressed it lightly against the puppy's body to help it thaw gradually. Steam rose faintly, mixing with the scent of wet fur. Slowly, a faint sigh escaped the tiny creature's mouth. Mark's breath caught. It was alive. Rex leaned closer, nudging the bundle gently with his nose. The sight nearly broke Mark's heart. A massive, disciplined police dog showing the gentlest compassion. "You found this little soul out there," he said softly. "You did good, Rex." But as the puppy gave a faint, broken whimper, Mark knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a fight against time and the freezing night outside. Mark moved quickly, his training as an officer taking over. "Rex, stay close," he said, his voice low but firm. The German shepherd obeyed instantly, though his anxious pacing betrayed his worry. Mark grabbed a wool blanket from the couch and wrapped it snugly around the trembling puppy. He could feel the faint heartbeat, weak but steady. That was hope. Fragile, but enough to keep him going. He adjusted the fire, stacking more wood until the flames roared brighter, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. "Come on, little one," he murmured, rubbing the puppy gently through the blanket. The puppy's tiny body twitched at the warmth, a faint sound escaping its throat, half whimper, half sigh. Mark's heart clenched. "That's it, you're a fighter." He poured warm water into a bowl and dipped a cloth in it, then began rubbing the puppy's paws and belly, careful not to overheat it. Every minute mattered. The temperature difference could be dangerous, but so could waiting too long. He alternated between warming the puppy and whispering soft encouragements. Rex sat beside him, his nose pressed close, occasionally licking the puppy's ear as if trying to share his own warmth. The fire crackled louder, filling the room with orange light. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he continued the rhythmic motion. Rub, breathe, hope. "Don't you give up on me now," he whispered. He checked for breathing again. There, a shallow rise and fall. Barely there, but real. Mark let out a shaky breath of relief. He reached for a small towel and carefully dried the puppy's fur, then wrapped it in a second, softer blanket. "You're safe now," he said softly. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside, 2 lives, one human and one canine, fought together to save a third. And for the first time that night, Mark began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could. The cabin was filled with the sound of crackling fire and the soft rhythm of Rex's pacing. He moved back and forth near the blanket where the puppy lay, his amber eyes fixed on the fragile life before him. Mark couldn't help but notice how different his dog looked tonight. Not just alert, but deeply emotional, almost human in his concern. Every few seconds, Rex would glance up at Mark, then back at the puppy as if asking, "Will he make it?" Mark reached out, running a hand through Rex's thick fur. "You did something incredible tonight, buddy," he murmured. Most would have walked past and never noticed. But Rex had noticed, because that's what he was trained for. That's who he was. Years of service had shaped him into one of the most dependable canines in the department. Mark remembered their first rescue together, a lost child found in the woods, cold and scared. Rex had followed a faint trail through rain and mud for hours, refusing to give up. It was the same determination he saw now. Rex sat beside the small bundle, lowering his head close enough for the puppy to feel his warmth. His breathing slowed, his instincts telling him to guard. Mark smiled softly at the sight. "You've got the heart of a hero," he said quietly. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside that tiny cabin, something sacred was unfolding. Not a mission or an order, but compassion in its purest form. Rex didn't understand the word rescue, yet he lived it every day. And as Mark watched his loyal partner keeping silent vigil over the tiny creature, he knew one thing for certain. Heroes come in all sizes, some with badges, and some with paws. The hours crawled by as the storm raged outside. Shaking the cabin walls and howling through the trees, Mark sat cross-legged beside the fire, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. The puppy's breathing was shallow, uneven, but it was still there. That single fact kept him awake long after exhaustion tried to pull him under. Rex hadn't moved from his spot. He lay close to the puppy, body curved protectively around it, eyes glowing amber in the firelight. Every few minutes he'd nudge the small form with his nose, checking, waiting, hoping. Mark could feel the dog's tension, the same gnawing worry that gripped him. "You're not sleeping either, huh?" he whispered. Rex blinked slowly as if to answer, "Not until it's safe." Mark poured a little warm milk into a shallow dish, testing it against his wrist before offering it. He used a dropper, carefully letting a few drops touch the puppy's lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint movement, a tiny lick. Mark froze, then smiled through weary eyes. "That's it, come on. Fight." The clock ticked past midnight. The fire crackled low and fatigue weighed heavy, but neither man nor dog surrendered to sleep. The bond between them felt stronger than ever, two protectors guarding a fragile life. Snow piled against the windows, muffling the world outside. Inside, time lost its shape. Mark's mind wandered between hope and fear, each breath of the puppy a fragile thread holding them all together. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, and Rex rested his head on his knee, letting out a quiet sigh. Together they kept vigil through the endless night, waiting for a miracle. Dawn crept slowly over the snow-covered horizon, turning the icy world outside the cabin into a soft palette of gold and white. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers that pulsed like a heartbeat in the silence. Mark sat slumped in his chair, his head heavy from fatigue when a faint sound cut through the quiet. A tiny, fragile whimper. His eyes flew open. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd imagined it, but then it came again, a small trembling cry, weak but alive. "Rex," Mark whispered, voice trembling. The German shepherd's head shot up instantly, ears forward, tail twitching in alert excitement. They both turned toward the blanket near the fire. The puppy stirred. A tiny paw shifted, then another. Its eyes remained closed, but its breathing grew stronger, steadier. Mark dropped to his knees, disbelief washing over him. "You did it," he murmured, his voice cracking with relief. "You made it through the night." Rex let out a soft whine, wagging his tail slowly as if understanding every word. Mark unwrapped the blanket slightly, letting a little warmth from the room touch the puppy's fur. The small creature let out another sound, and not one of pain but of life. A fragile heartbeat thudded beneath his fingertips. "Welcome back, little one," he said softly, smiling through tears he didn't bother to hide. Rex gently nudged the puppy with his nose, then rested his head beside it, sighing contentedly. Mark couldn't help but chuckle. "You're already a big brother, huh?" Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a still world blanketed in white. Inside, a miracle had unfolded, quiet, tender, and full of hope. The long night was finally over, and life, against all odds, had found its way back into the warmth of their cabin. By mid-morning, the storm had calmed, leaving the forest cloaked in silence. The sun broke through the clouds in pale streaks, glittering off snow-laden branches. Inside the cabin, the puppy slept soundly beside Rex, wrapped in a soft blanket. Mark stood by the window, sipping coffee, his mind still turning over the same question. Where had Rex found the puppy? He looked down at his partner. "Show me, boy," he said quietly. Rex's ears perked, tail flicking once. He seemed to understand immediately. Within minutes, Mark bundled up in his patrol jacket, pulled on his gloves, and opened the cabin door. The cold air bit at his face, sharp and clean. Rex bounded out, nose to the ground, already picking up the scent. They trudged through the deep snow, leaving a winding trail of footprints behind. The forest was eerily still. No birds, no movement, just the faint creak of ice-laden trees. Mark followed close as Rex led him deeper into the woods, occasionally pausing to sniff, then pressing forward with purpose. After about 15 minutes, they reached a small clearing where the snow looked disturbed, scattered paw prints half buried in drifts. Mark knelt, brushing away the top layer of snow. His breath caught. Beneath it lay a cardboard box, its sides soggy and torn, half buried by the storm. Inside were faint traces of old fabric, and something else, tiny paw prints leading away from it. Mark's stomach twisted. "Someone left them here," he murmured, the realization hitting like ice water. Rex whined softly, pressing his nose to the box as if confirming it. Mark stood slowly, anger and sorrow mixing in his chest. "You found the only one who survived," he said quietly, glancing at his loyal companion. The forest around them was silent, but the truth hung heavy in the cold air. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the uncovering of something cruel. Mark crouched beside the half-buried box, his gloved hand trembling slightly as he lifted its torn lid. Inside lay a scrap of soaked cloth, a chewed toy, and faint traces of straw, the kind used to line an animal crate. The realization hit him like a blow. This wasn't an accident. Someone had left the litter here to die. Rex sniffed around the box, his nose twitching rapidly. Then he moved a few steps away and began pawing at the snow. Mark followed, brushing the powder aside. Beneath the surface were small paw prints, tiny, fragile, and leading away from the box. The trail wound toward the forest, barely visible beneath the new layer of snow. He followed the prints for a few feet before they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the storm's aftermath. Mark's chest tightened. They didn't stand a chance, he murmured. The thought of helpless puppies left in that cold cut deep. He glanced at Rex, whose head hung low, tail still. Even the dog seemed to feel the weight of what they'd found. Mark took out his phone and snapped a few photos for the report. But deep down, this wasn't about paperwork or evidence anymore. It was personal. The box, the snow, the tiny trail of paws, it all told a story of cruelty, of survival against impossible odds. He crouched down beside Rex, running a hand over his partner's fur. "You did what no one else could, buddy," he whispered. "You saved the only one who made it out." Rex pressed closer, his warm breath fogging the cold air. Together they stood in the quiet clearing, surrounded by untouched snow, the only witnesses to a tragedy that one loyal dog had refused to ignore. Mark drove back to the cabin. The image of that frozen box burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the thought of how many more might have been out there, left in the cold, unseen, unheard. Rex sat beside him in the passenger seat, eyes on the road ahead, silent but alert, as if he too understood the gravity of what they'd uncovered. Back inside, the puppy was sleeping peacefully by the fire, its small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Mark knelt beside it, brushing a hand gently over its tiny paw. "You made it," he whispered. "But we need to find out who did this." He pulled out his phone and called the local animal shelter, asking if they'd received any reports of missing or abandoned litters. The woman on the other end sighed heavily. "You're not the first officer to call about this," she said. "We've had several cases in the past month, people dumping unwanted puppies when they can't sell them. Some never make it through the night." Mark's jaw tightened. "That's cruelty, not desperation," he muttered. He took down the details, cross-referencing them with recent reports from the department. The pattern was clear. Remote areas, late-night abandonments always during bad weather to cover tracks. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. He glanced at Rex, who watched him quietly from across the room. "Looks like we've got another case, partner," he said softly. Rex tilted his head, tail thumping once against the floor. Mark looked out the window, the snow still glittering in the morning sun. What had started as a rescue was turning into something deeper, a search for justice, sparked by one loyal dog and the life he refused to let die. The days that followed were quiet, filled with care, warmth, and a growing bond that no one had planned for. The puppy, once barely clinging to life, was now beginning to move its tiny paws, stretching, yawning, and squeaking softly whenever Rex came near. The cabin, which had always been silent after long patrol shifts, now pulsed with life. Mark set up a small basket near the fireplace lined with an old fleece blanket. "This will be your spot, little one," he said gently as he placed the puppy inside. Rex lay down beside it immediately, as if taking guard duty. Mark smiled faintly. "You're not letting him out of your sight, are you?" The truth was, Rex had changed since that night. There was a new protectiveness in his behavior, something paternal and tender. He'd nudge the puppy closer to the warmth, lick its fur clean, and growl softly if a sudden noise startled it. It was as though he'd decided that saving it once wasn't enough. He'd protect it forever. Mark couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside him either. Every time the puppy whimpered or Rex leaned close to comfort it, something stirred in his chest. A quiet warmth he hadn't felt in years. After losing his wife 2 winters ago, the cabin had become a place of silence and duty. But now, with Rex and this tiny life beside him, it felt like home again. He sat by the fire one evening, watching Rex and the puppy sleep side by side. "Maybe this is where you belong," he whispered. The flames flickered, casting a golden glow on them both. And in that moment, Mark made his choice. He would keep the puppy not as a rescue, but as part of their family. Days turned into weeks. and the cabin slowly transformed from a quiet patrol retreat into a place filled with warmth and laughter. Or rather, the soft yips and playful growls of a growing puppy. The once frozen little creature now had a name: Scout. Mark had chosen it one morning while watching the pup stumble across the rug, curious about every shadow. "You've got a brave heart," he'd said with a grin. "Scout suits you." Rex had become his shadow, mentor, and protector all in one. Wherever Scout went, Rex followed, patient and gentle even when the puppy tugged at his tail or climbed over his back. Sometimes Mark would catch Rex pretending to sleep while Scout pawed at his face, too kind to push him away. "You're spoiling him," Mark teased. But his voice was full of affection. Each evening, after patrol, Mark would find them curled up together by the fire, Rex's large frame wrapped protectively around Scout's smaller one. The sight never failed to soften the hardened lines of his face. The bond between them was unlike anything he'd seen. It wasn't just companionship. It was devotion. As the snow began to melt outside, life returned to the woods. Birds sang again, rivers thawed, and the bitter cold faded into memory. Inside, Scout took his first clumsy steps toward independence, barking at his reflection in the window or tumbling over his own paws. Rex watched patiently, tail thumping with pride. Mark stood by the door one evening, coffee in hand, watching his two dogs bathed in golden firelight. He smiled softly. "You saved him, Rex," he said. "And maybe he saved us too." For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive. Spring had arrived, painting the forest in shades of green. The snow was gone, replaced by wildflowers pushing through the thawing ground. Scout had grown stronger, his fur shiny, his eyes bright with mischief. Every morning he'd race Rex to the edge of the clearing, tumbling into the grass while Rex patiently herded him back. Life had settled into a rhythm of peace and laughter. Then, one quiet afternoon, the phone rang. Mark picked it up, expecting another routine call from the precinct. But the voice on the other end trembled with emotion. "Officer Jensen, I think you might have found one of my puppies." Mark's heart skipped. "Can you explain?" he asked, his tone cautious. The woman continued. 3 months ago, someone broke into my property. They stole the mother and her litter. We found the mother weeks later, injured, terrified, but her puppies were gone. We searched everywhere. The shelter said you reported a rescue. Please tell me it's true." Mark looked toward the fireplace where Scout and Rex lay playing with a chewed-up tennis ball. "He's safe," he said quietly. "He's healthy, strong, and very loved." The woman's voice cracked. "I need to see him, please." Rex, sensing something different in Mark's tone, sat up, ears twitching. Scout barked once, confused by the sudden tension in the room. Mark's gaze softened. "You're going to meet someone very important soon. Little one," he murmured as he hung up the phone. He glanced at Rex. "Looks like we've got visitors coming." The German shepherd tilted his head as if asking what that meant. Mark smiled faintly. "It means this story might not be over yet." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, calm, expectant, carrying the promise of an unexpected reunion. 2 days later, a small car pulled up outside Mark's cabin. The air was warm and clear, filled with birdsong. Rex was the first to notice, lifting his head from the porch steps and letting out a low bark. Scout, now lively and curious, ran to the door, tail wagging furiously. Mark stepped outside, brushing his hands on his jeans as the car door opened. A woman in her early 30s stepped out, clutching a worn photo in her hand. Her eyes were tired but hopeful. "Officer Jensen?" she asked softly. Mark nodded. "You must be Mrs. Rayner." She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "Yes, I brought this." She held out the photo, a picture of a golden-furred mother dog surrounded by 6 tiny puppies, all identical except for one small patch on the chest. Mark's heart tightened. That same white patch now glowed on Scout's chest as he bounded down the steps toward her. The woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's him," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "That's my baby." She knelt and Scout stopped just short of her, sniffing cautiously. Then, as if recognizing something familiar, he jumped into her arms, tail wagging uncontrollably. Rex watched quietly from behind, his eyes soft. Mark stepped closer, his voice gentle. "We found him during the storm. He was frozen, barely alive. Rex brought him home." Tears streamed down Mrs. Rayner's face as she hugged Scout tightly. "You saved him." she whispered, looking up at Mark and Rex. You saved my heart. Mark's throat tightened. He's been family here, he said. If you want to take him back. But she shook her head, smiling through tears. No, he's where he belongs. You and Rex, you're his heroes. In that quiet moment, surrounded by sunlight and gratitude, 3 lives intertwined, bound not by blood, but by love and the second chances born from a storm. The afternoon sun dipped low behind the trees, casting a golden glow across the clearing. The storm that had once nearly taken a life now felt like a distant memory, replaced by warmth, laughter, and gratitude. Mrs. Rayner sat on the porch steps, watching Scout play with Rex, the 2 dogs chasing each other in circles, their barks echoing through the peaceful woods. Mark leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. He's come a long way, he said. Mrs. Rayner nodded, wiping a tear. I can't believe he survived. I owe you both more than words can ever repay. Mark chuckled softly. You don't owe us anything. He's family now. Rex trotted up, nudging Scout toward the woman. Scout wagged his tail and licked her hand, then bounded back toward the fire pit where his favorite stick waited. The simple joy of it all filled the air, the kind that needed no words. Before she left, Mrs. Rayner opened the car door and revealed a small bundle inside, another puppy, golden and bright-eyed. She's one of Scout's sisters, she said with a smile. I wanted him to have family too. Mark's eyes softened as Rex sniffed the newcomer curiously, his tail wagging in approval. Guess our family just got bigger, he said with a grin. The woman laughed through tears. He couldn't have ended up in better hands. As her car disappeared down the winding road, Mark turned back toward the cabin. Scout and his sister curled beside Rex near the porch, their fur bathed in sunset light. Mark took a deep breath, feeling peace settle deep in his chest. He looked at Rex and whispered, You didn't just save a life that night, you built one. And as twilight fell, 3 hearts, man, dog, and pup, began a new chapter together, bound forever by the warmth born from one frozen night.